So it will be posted to the DR workshops website hopefully soon. I'm not sure. I think we might still be needing to post the previous one as well. I will get on that, I assure you. I'll let you know that all of the attendees are muted right now. And please stay muted unless you're speaking. We do have a raise hand function, so we will try and definitely keep our eyes on that, and also in the chat room. As we like to do, we want to make sure that you all are safe. Know your surroundings and your emergency exits. A lot of us work from home now, so we're probably quite familiar with our own homes. But nonetheless, it's always good to be sure. An ergonomic check, as we like to have you be comfortable. And in case of emergency, call 911, or if you can't, you can, for whatever reason, maybe try to chat as well. Please refrain from discussing other proceedings in this case as commissioners, in case commissioners or other deciding personnel are on the present to avoid inadvertent ex parte. I don't think that necessarily will be a problem, but it's always good to practice on meetings such as this. This slide also shows you where you can find the various functions as you need them. And I sent out this slide deck this morning. If you did not get it, may mention in the chat or send an email to myself or Eric or Daniel, and we will be sure to get it to you. So here is our schedule, our biweekly schedule with the red arrow indicating where we are in this discussion, which is at the end of the BNLI discussion and the lead into the compliance shortfall penalty section of the discussion. And then here is here's the agenda. We're going to be starting with, obviously, here with the introductions, et cetera, and then we will move into the main part of the meeting with a discussion of the performance metric comments we received and an additional discussion around how we plan to do testing of the concepts presented. After that, there will be a short 5-minute break, and then we'll move into a discussion of the next topic, the CSP, before wrapping up with next steps. And at this point, unless there are any additional questions that we may have, I'm going to have to figure out how something. Hey, do we have any additional questions at this point? Please unmute yourself if you have a question. If not, we will move on to the review of the performance metric comments and the staff consensus on preliminary testing methods. And let me just start by just providing this slide here. We received 7 comments from these listed parties, including the IOUs, the Cal ISO, and then LEAP, CLICA, and SEDMET. Where it says support, I should note that none of these are blanket support necessarily, that they do provide some either caveats or suggested improvements that are worth reading. This is not meant to be comprehensive of their full comments. Obviously, it's a brief 1-line, 2-line discussion here, just to give you an idea. I did send out the comments last night, and again, if you need those, they will be made available on the DR Workshops website, but I can also send them to you if you email me. And from there, I would like to hand it off to Daniel, I believe. Daniel, are you the one who will be?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds good.
All right, and I will just I'll control the slide deck, and you can.
Right, yeah, I'll let you know when to move on. So yeah, this is sort of how we as staff are thinking about the performance metrics that will ultimately be tested in that sort of December testing period that we've called out. I think this slide hopefully also operates as sort of a for reference slide. there are a lot of similarities between the sort of BNLI regression paradigm and the DSA's performance and bid alignment metric paradigm. We wanted to sort of call out the different names that we're sort of associating with different functions here. A lot of similarities. The most important one, I think, to draw attention to is sort of that bottom row of data inputs, that what staff anyways is understanding the primary difference between what these two methods accomplish at a very high level is regression across individual events versus sort of this seasonal average. A lot of how we're understanding the time temperature matrix and the performance alignment metrics have overlap between what the original CEC proposal is doing via the capability profiles and what the bid normalized load impact itself is trying to accomplish. Again, this is really high level, but it's just to emphasize that these are the two paradigms that are sort of shaking out of this proposal and comment period that we as staff are gravitating towards as I think models for what we'll ultimately be testing in December. And hopefully this slide can operate as a little bit of a guide for what are some of the key points or sort of key differences between the two methods. We're obviously not trying to misrepresent anything here, so if there are comments or sort of confusions that this is causing, please do feel free to reach out to us. But with that, I think we can go to the next slide. And
I think Josh has
oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Sorry, I can't see the hands.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I see the same issue whenever I present too. Can't see the hands. Just a quick comment here. Appreciate the fact trying to put things in parallel and kind of do a comparison. I will kind of point out that the exposed accounting for weather sensitivity and here focusing on the bid alignment metric, but really that happens in the performance alignment metric where you're comparing actuals to what you said you would deliver. Right. So I'm not sure if that's a nuance that's in there, because our proposal kind of has a bid component, but really the bid alignment metric is both a component that's trying to look at bids and also look at performance. So really, if I look at exposed accounting for weather sensitivity, I would say it's the comparison of what was put in the time temperature matrix to what was actually delivered.
Okay, that's good to call out. I had understood the bid alignment metric as sort of being the primary point of reference to the time temperature matrix, but
No, it's actually the performance alignment metric is completely the way we designed the time temperature matrix is to allow a direct comparison of actual performance during events to what you put in your basic capability profile.
okay. And so the bid alignment or the bid capability profile then is that not informed by the weather sensitivity of a resource?
Oh, it should be as well. I mean, like both the bids and the performance should match what you put into the capability profile.
Okay, so maybe a better representation of that point is sort of including the performance, both the performance alignment metric and the bid alignment metric via the time temperature matrix, sort of accounting for that weather sensitivity.
And we can work through the wording, but I think it's just,
Okay.
It's just little subtle nuances.
No, that's much appreciated. I think that's sort of that's great to hopefully this language can be accurate. So
yeah,
appreciate that. We'll try to adjust that. I don't know if there are any other comments from folks. Oh yeah. Let's see, thumbs up. Okay. Yeah, well, with that, again, we're trying to have some sort of point of reference here. And we'll certainly update and share the deck as comments arise. Okay, well, I think we can move on to the next slide. That sort of is describing more directly what we're trying to do with both of these methods, or sort of these paradigms of assessing performance. The emphasis here is that we're going to be doing this in parallel. Again, we're not starting this. I think there was some confusion about whether there's going to be testing at this point in this working group process. We are not certain what our data set looks like yet for the testing. And we also recognize that in order to do either of these performance metrics, we will need information, whether it be a capability profile or a time temperature matrix. We're going to need that from the DRPs themselves. So that's not happening yet. In December, we do want to test both of these methods. And we do recognize that there are some specifics that are not yet finalized. I'm sort of dwelling on this a little bit just because I think there's some words that have been used, it's my fault entirely, but the finalized element here is not actually all that final. We want to be sure that we're testing sort of the full breadth of options within reason. What that could look like is parameterizing some of those specific values. What I'm calling out here is that we had picked some numbers for price caps or for the 20% elbows. I think we'll get into more sort of what we're considering right now as staff, but we have, I think, the ability to change those values in the process of testing, and see how that performance metric changes with slightly different values. Again, the important point here is that we are not trying to reconcile the DSA's proposal with the BNLI paradigm. We think they both have merits, and we would like to see how they work independent of each other. So just to make sure that's clear, hopefully the next slide isn't going to cause too much confusion, but the point is that we haven't finalized all of these elements. We are considering additional adjustments, and we'll get into the specific adjustments for BNLI and for the things that we're considering with regards to the DSA's proposal. I think that there will be exactly more up to date and hopefully a more robust documentation of all of this before we get to this December period. Realistically, I think this is probably the most complicated or I think the most nuanced element of the three topics that we're going to be discussing in this working group. But I just want to make sure that I emphasize that now. So with that, I think we can go into the next slide and talk about what staff is going to continue considering from the stakeholder comments that we received. On the BNLI proposal, we saw three general categories kind of come up over and over again. These points were around which markets we were looking at, this concept of a price cap, and the concept of baselines. So right now, I think what staff is leaning towards, but a lot of these ideas again are really in this less than finalized format, is considering using the real-time market when prices are at the already defined $949 per megawatt hour threshold. For long start resources, we're considering that we use the long start scheduling within the real-time market. However, if they are not bidded or if they do not get cleared or scheduled in the day ahead market, then they would not be credited for the BNLI. I may let Eric, I see you're coming up, chime in with a little bit more color to this.
Yeah, sorry, I'm realizing this is very much a new idea, and we're kind of just jumping in here. Daniel, do you mind if I share my screen for a moment?
Not at all.
Yeah, we were just having some conversations, offline about how to handle this idea, around, how do we accommodate long start resources? Let's see. And so the idea that we've been kicking around, and as Daniel mentioned, this is really kind of like a brainstorm at this point, looking for feedback. But so big idea being, we've kind of all agreed that PDR should be available in the day ahead market at this price cap. It's very close to the overall CAISO bid cap, $949 megawatt hour. The idea here is that PDR should be available in the real-time market at the same price. So if you are a short start resource, if you can bid into the real-time market, that's pretty, that's straightforward. You just do that, and that's sort of all good. We recognize that, by definition, long start PDR can't do that. And so that the idea would be, let's only look at the day ahead market results unless the real-time market price meets that same threshold, $949 a megawatt hour. Of course, there's a little bit more work we have to do to define exactly what that means, because we are going from 1 hourly price to 12 5-minute prices. I've sort of suggested the median as a starting point here. And so effectively what this is doing is giving long start PDR resources the responsibility to bid, so that if there is a significant spike in the real-time market, that they should be picked up, right? And that could sort of incentivize bidding a little bit below 949 without sort of any kind of prescriptive, CEC or CPUC staff needing to say, here's exactly what you need to bid. And just quickly to kind of visualize what this looks like, I have the day ahead prices. This is, for the CAISO wide, so it probably doesn't include a lot of sort of, regional locational effects for congestion and losses and all that, but I think it's still pretty telling. So day ahead price on the x-axis, median real-time price on the y-axis. The idea is anything to the right of this bid cap should be picked up in the day ahead market. Kind of not a problem we need to solve. A lot of these end up being important sort of days or important hours in the real-time market as well. Sometimes the things get less tight, and maybe it wasn't quite so important, but that's okay. They were scheduled in the real-time market or in the day-ahead market, and that's good. The types of intervals we're trying to address are these ones in here, right? So we have the August 2020 heat wave, where we had prices kind of 500 to 900 or so. And then the September 2020 heat wave, where we had prices at 750 to 900 or so. And in both cases, fairly high prices, but not hitting that cap, or not hitting the cap. And so, anything that wasn't available in the real-time market or wasn't dispatched in the day-ahead market, like really would have been left in the sidelines. So from a reliability perspective, these are the small set of hours where we really need resources to be available. And so I think kind of the general idea is that, if, let's say you did just bid the price cap in the day ahead market, you weren't dispatched, and then, this hour materialized, if you're not able to bid again into the real-time market, you take a 0, right? For that one individual interval. If you are able to decrease your bid a little bit, to 800 or 900, you would start picking up more of these hours in the day ahead market. That's fewer intervals that you'd end up with a 0. And, if you wanted to be really conservative, you could go down to, the $600 as we've proposed as a price cap. really capture all of these critical moments. But that's sort of a choice that, you know, the DR provider gets to make. Yes, Josh is correctly observing that all of those days had really high net loads. Absolutely, and that's definitely one of the drivers of really high prices. So that is the thought on how to accommodate long start resources that can only bid in the day ahead market. You know, I did a little bit more thinking on, you know, how I came up with median as opposed to some other measure. I probably won't go into that now, but can share that if folks are interested. So yeah, that's the idea there.
Eric, this is Luke. I apologize. I'm calling from my phone, so can't figure out the raise hand function here. But
Sure.
This is thank you for this explanation, and Daniel, you as well. So to be clear, you're saying that under that scenario, the long start DR resource would get a 0 BNLI rather than simply no BNLI score.
That yes, under the conditions that they're not dispatched in the day ahead market, they don't bid into the real time market, and prices hit 949 in the real time market. So it's really just a very small kind of number of hours that this would happen in, and mostly is likely to occur when prices are already quite high in the day ahead market. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So a few things. One is, I don't know how. I think this kind of points to the need to really have some more detail as to how exactly this BNLI is going to work, because, you know, if someone, you know, because most DR, I won't say all DR, but most DR tends to dispatch, and not a whole lot of times within a given month, then one BNLI score of 0 could be very consequential. And again, not knowing at all how it's actually going to, you know, work out on paper. And so it's difficult to know if this is, you know, a good approach or not in the absence of that, you know, implementation detail, because I'm, you know, it sounds to me what you're doing is you're punishing long start DR for the simple fact that customers are not capable of responding that quickly. And you know, I continue to maintain the position that that's, you know, discriminatory and is going to freeze out or you know, depress a long start DR. And I recognize, you know, we all want DR to be able to respond in 5 seconds and all this sort of thing, but the reality is it's not going to be that way. And honestly, I don't see the role of the DR QC counting methodology is trying to force that functionality into DR, you know, on DR providers. You know, it's kind of a backdoor way of doing it when the PUC itself and even the ISO both recognize that, you know, some DR is long start and it's always going to be that way.
Sure, thanks. You know, and I think it's, you know, it's possible that the sort of price cap as we proposed kind of eliminates the need for that. And I did see you sort of retracted opposition to that. So, you know, it's possible that, you know, as long as we have sort of a reasonable price cap in the day ahead market. Sorry, I'm just going to share my screen one more time. So yeah. But let me just make this one point real quick, which is, you know, if we have a price cap that's, you know, somewhere between, you know, $500 and $750, something like that, 700 maybe, that we're going to capture all these days, and that we sort of wouldn't need to worry about these days that, you know, something happened in the real-time market, but, you know, it doesn't necessarily seem reasonable that we should have been able to predict that. So it's possible that a more prescriptive way, which is the sort of price cap kind of approach in BNLI, is a better way to do that. That's like a little bit more transparent to DR providers and doesn't put as much sort of onus on them to be sort of predicting outcomes in the real-time market.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, that was it.
Okay, yeah, I mean, and that's the purpose, why the council. I'm not saying we support, necessarily a price cap, but we are, withdrawing our opposition to one because of that, recognition that there needs to be, that it's a high priority on the part of the CC and ED folks that, there needs to be a bit more certainty there, and so that's the purpose behind that. So, to me, that seems reasonable. In fact, a very reasonable compromise. So we don't think there's a need to, impose any sort of or adopt any sort of detrimental or kind of like punishment, elements to Longstar DR, who, as you just conceded, is very are incapable of, just like anybody else, of accurately predicting what the market prices are the next day.
Sure. Yeah. I saw a hand from Eric.
Hey, Eric, this is Eric with the CAISO. Just a clarification question. So for non-long start DR that, had a dispatch at a lower price point, like how would this treat that, or what would it still compare that performance to the day ahead schedule or bid, or would it use the real-time schedule?
That's a really good question. I'll have to think about that. I'm not sure if I can wrap my head around that off the cuff here. Yeah, let me think about that. But yeah, that is one of the things we are wrangling with, and if there are folks with that kind of resource out there, we'd love to hear from you about how that would work for you.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, I think, one thing we're thinking about is just that there can be changes between the day ahead and real-time schedules for DR that bids in the real-time market. So it might not be a real direct comparison between their day ahead schedule.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good point. I wonder. Yeah, I'll have to think about that a little bit more. My first thought was sort of like maybe it's like a max of what you bid. So if you increase your bid in the real-time market for whatever reason, you can get that. But yeah, it's going to be complicated. I'll think about it.
Okay, thanks.
Looks like we have another hand from Colin.
Thanks. Just clarifying real quick, because I know there's been some confusion in the past about when options were meant to be implemented together and when they were mutually exclusive. If this sort of implied price cap for long start resources in the real-time market was put into place, then the view is that then there would be no need to have a soft price cap of $600 per megawatt hour for any resource.
That's a really good question. I think that was my initial thought. The more I think about it, the less I'm sure about that, unfortunately. Because I think, while the sort of price cap does get resources into the day ahead market more frequently when, again, when there's kind of a risk of these type events happening in the real time. I don't think it protects against what it was initially formulated to do, which is sort of stop the normalized impact from being sort of overinflated by bids at really high levels that are very unlikely to be dispatched. So you could get your sort of, yeah, I guess it would still be subject to that in the real time day ahead or real time market. So I think where I'm sort of leaning, especially since folks are kind of reducing opposition to the bid cap is or price cap, I should say, is just that and not this additional measure. Again, for more certainty for DRPs, you know, this would still sort of end up counting these points in this region as zeros if you weren't able to be bid. So, you know, it has some downsides to it, and I think maybe just the price cap would do basically the same thing.
Yeah, thanks,
Feel
Eric.
free
That sounds reasonable.
Great.
Yeah, so I guess maybe that preempts some of the other points on the slide and sort of this alternative price cap that we were also considering. This sort of like soft opt-in. Maybe I can, I guess, speak to it very briefly. But in the event that we go with something more like what was originally proposed, this is a little bit tangential. But the thought was that sort of relevant to, I think, Josh's comment also in the chat, that theoretically we could maybe set it up such that you would not have a sort of an enforced or I think there's potentially a legal concern that we were running into with a price cap also, and instead we could have this sort of tiered effect of you maybe get a bonus for opting in to the $600 megawatt hour threshold. It would not necessarily be required to be counted for the BNOI, but would benefit a provider that decided to commit to bidding in their resources below that price.
Daniel, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the context of that discussion was sort of alongside this new idea that we were
Entirely.
around. Yeah.
So like this, yeah, exactly. And
so to your point, maybe not as relevant anymore, but you know,
to be considered with this real-time day-ahead market point. There's sort of a package deal potentially, or an element that maybe addresses some of the concerns from, maybe not all of them, but sort of was meant as a complement to this real-time, and day-ahead market noodling. So any event, I guess this all demonstrates that, you know, we still are trying to work through some of these adjustments. The final point that hopefully is a little
Daniel,
bit easier.
I see a hand from Josh.
Yeah, Josh.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious here. Obviously, like the day ahead market's not perfect. It's not gonna, tell you if the generator goes down or anything like that ahead of time. But is there an in-between position somewhere in here? Because, like right now we have a stark contrast between, or the economy, you're saying like here's the day ahead market versus a 5-minute market, and there's a lot of space in between that, right? So I'm kind of curious how CAISO handles when you can tell you need resources. Like let's say it was August 14th. There's a very clear need for resources there, or September 5th, 6th, and 7th. There's a very clear need for resources that wasn't picked up in the day-ahead market. But you have all these DR resources, many of them which can be dispatched if you give people a 3-hour notice or a 2-hour notice. But they're not going to operate in the 5-minute market. So I'm kind of curious how that gets incorporated, because I think the goal here is to make sure that those available resources can be called upon if needed. So I think there's just a lot of space between that, and it's just a train of thought. I don't have an answer here, but to me, there's, going from day ahead to 5-minute, it leaves a lot of space in between.
This is Luke. I mean, that was always, John. I mean, it's a fair point, but that was always the trade-off for the commission to force, market integration, right? It was always going to limit itself to those 2 timeframes for dispatch. And prior to that, there were programs that could be dispatched sometimes same day, but they were with several hours of lead time, and as you point out, the ISO market does not allow for that, so that's where we are.
Kaiso want to weigh in on that at all? And then I see another hand, but I'll just want to see if Kaiso has a reaction first.
Eric, this is Eric. No immediate reaction, but yeah, I'll take that back to the team. Thanks.
Sure, thanks.
Colin has a hand up. Maybe not. Maybe it was just lingering.
Sorry, it took me a second to get off mute. Can everyone hear?
Yep. Can hear you.
Can't hear you
Or we-
now.
Yeah, we could anyway.
Yeah.
What now?
Yep, there you
Okay, awesome. Sorry about that. I just wanted to chime in about the sort of soft opt-in price cap idea. That there already is a sort of incentive for resources to bid in at lower price thresholds, and that is that they would have a higher chance of getting picked up in the market and thereby getting paid. And so as we kind of talk about different mechanisms to achieve the goals that we're talking about, not to take for granted the fact that markets already have a lot of built-in mechanisms and incentives that are designed to do some of the things that we are discussing about how to do.
Right. Well, so I guess I'm gonna maybe flag this sort of this point on real-time day ahead markets as is a little bit unfinalized. The final point that we had on this slide, just to kind of keep things moving a little bit, was baselines. And hopefully we can clarify some of the language that was included in a lot of the comments that we received, and say that the way we are currently thinking about this is having the ability to use the best counterfactuals available as the LIP filings currently operate. So obviously there's different data that different DRPs or IOUs have access to, but we just wanted to call out that we're trying to set up this performance metric to use the best baselines available or best counterfactuals available. So that could include universal comparison groups, etc.
Yeah, and I'll just issue an apology for probably muddying the waters by trying to talk about this in this context, but I think this is how things currently operate. We use the ISO baselines in settlement, and then we go find the best that we can do in LIPs. I just wanted to sort of clarify that as the policy preference. But yeah, I don't think it's not really a departure from currently what we do, other than sort of signaling an interest in pursuing this kind of comparison group methodology additionally.
Right. So I guess the point then I want to just say is I think we have this sort of, yeah, we can go into the sort of possible adjustments to the DSA's proposals as well. I do want to suggest that maybe on the market point, we could continue that discussion either in sort of smaller one-on-one groups or over email, but where we are hoping to figure this out in a timely manner. But yeah, I think we can continue that discussion elsewhere. So I think continuing on to considered adjustments to DSA's proposal. I might let Eric take this one. But these are per comments, but also sort of per staff considerations.
Sure. Yeah. I think, Josh, I think we exchanged a few emails about this, but some of my suggestions for the PAM and BAM approach is really use the time temperature matrix just to compare to the bids and use that for bid alignment metric. I mentioned I don't think we would need to include sort of multiple durations of dispatch, because the DR should always be bidding its full duration, right? If it's shown for 5 hours, it should always bid that full 5-hour resource. If it's 4 hours, it should bid that 4-hour resource. But then when we move from BAM to PAM performance metric, I think it would make sense to only compare what was delivered to what was effectively asked of it by the CAISO, right? What was dispatched, or total expected energy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that would account for partial dispatches too, which I'm not sure if we were comparing directly to the time temperature matrix that would do.
So
that's-
I think so. BAM, I don't
Cool.
have a problem. I don't think that's an issue, right? Because you just need to have a set of rules that says people. It's clear what people need to bid in to kind of say they're really truly aligning, right? And that clarity needs to be in place there. For PAM, I think what you're trying to get at is that you just need to apply a weight that says, look, if you told me what you put in your TTM, but if I'm doing partial dispatch, I need to make sure that's weighted, according to the partial dispatch in the market itself. So, which is easy to do. I think we've already been thinking about that.
Okay. And so that would still account for, or maybe we can talk about what that would look like offline.
Yeah, I think the goal is sound, right? Which is like you need to account for partial dispatches. That's basically it, right? And how do we do about that? We can probably talk about that.
Yeah. And I think sort of implied in what I'm saying is that, if you if you have sort of a full dispatch window that you're bidding into, and you're only getting dispatched for some portion of that, there's no world in which your sort of like hourly load impacts should be lower than if you got the full window. They might not be higher, but you should have at least that much capacity as you bid in for the full window, right? If you only get the last 3 hours of your resource dispatched, you might actually have more because you're starting later, and you're not you don't have fatigue by that point. Yeah, so I think that's sort of just the general thought, is that we probably don't need to account for like a bunch of different start times and a bunch of different dispatch durations in the time temperature matrix.
And that's in the BAM side, not in the PAM side. Because for the performance alignment metric, you need those different durations.
Yeah. So I think we agree on the BAM side. I would still suggest, if you're just comparing dispatches and schedules, that then you wouldn't need that either.
Yeah, but the whole point of the performance alignment metric, right, is that I'm telling you, here's what I can deliver, and accounting for the fact that you may have different performance based on the duration of the event, right? And that allows me to make a direct comparison. Whereas if you, and that's in line with the slice of day mentality, right? With slice of day, you can't show different amount of resource adequacy by hour. You don't have to show me a 4-hour block that's essentially a block that's exactly the same. And it's in line with the concept of a variable resource. You can have different values by hour. And I think like that's the component that I think is necessary under the performance line metrics. Otherwise, you can't do a direct comparison between what I told you I could do, right? If you call me at this time, if you dispatch me for this length under this weather condition, I can make that direct comparison to what got delivered ex post. And the whole purpose of PAM is to compare directly what you said you could do in the capability matrix, which is really tied to the slice a day, right? And allow that comparison very directly with the actual performance. I think you're focused a lot in the market. I'm focused on the slice a day. And the slice a day does allow you to, sit there and say, like, look, I want to have a different amount of megawatts available by hour.
I think I do agree with that. Right, that you'd be able to show both in your time temperature matrix and in your slice of day profile that you have 10 megawatts in the first hour, and then 8, and then 6, and then 5, or whatever it is. And again, if you're dispatched in the third hour, you might actually have 10 in the third hour, right? That's like so you might be able to increase above that, but really, like what we ultimately need to compare against is like if you're dispatched for the full resource on the worst day, which means you wouldn't be starting in that third hour. So just my thought.
Or can I say if you have a partial dispatch, you need to adjust for that in the performance line because you're not going 100% of resources.
Yeah. Okay. And then the last thing I think we've already talked about, and but that I think we should multiply BAM and PAM. So like BAM sort of sets the maximum that you can get because that's as much as you were offering to the market. And then, PAM sort of further, if there's reduced performance, can like bring it down from there. But the best you can do is BAM.
I have a question about the testing. I know we haven't covered that yet, but I'm kind of curious how we're going to deal with like the bids in the testing, because once you kind of set the rules for how you're going to use the bids for resource adequacy, right, the bidding strategy changes.
Yeah.
And I think like the testing, the bid part of things, the performance part should be straightforward. The bid part will be challenging, right? Because the issue, the way I see it right now, is historically DR was not treated as a time varying like limited resource, that varied with weather overall. So you kind of had this option between saying we're going to bid in the full capacity, which really only occurs at a particular set of conditions for some resources, right? Or you could bid in what you actually thought you could deliver. So you kind of had this juxtaposition between one or the other, which is what led to like people are not bidding the full capacity, or vice versa, people are bidding more than they say they can bid. So I just kind of think we're going to have a bit of a challenge in testing out some of the bid components using historical data, because as soon as there's a rule change, the bidding strategy will change.
Yeah, I definitely agree that that will be imperfect. Sort of off the top of my head, I think one thing that we could do, at least my understanding is, for that excess QC that DR providers are required to bid, but they maybe don't actually think that they have it. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that, but that they typically bid at or near the bid cap. So it's possible, one sort of sensitivity case that we could run is, what if we just exclude that part that was bid, we can define some threshold like 950 or something, that basically says this wasn't really bid, this was attempting to avoid being dispatched, but was required to be bid. So we could try to do some sensitivities around that.
And I agree with that. It's going to be kind of a complicated issue. Of course, when we do the final analysis of the historical data, if you will, we will also just have to keep in mind these caveats, if you will, about how rules would maybe affect the actual change. So it's going to be a little art, a little science, obviously, when we get when we do the analysis, and it's still going to have there's still going to be questions, I assume, at the end, but we're going to do the best we can with what we have. we can't unfortunately we don't have a lab where we can experiment with the rule changes and everybody bidding as if the rule changes were actually in effect. But like I said, art, science, we will just have to figure out our interpretation of these and our methodologies kind of on, as it goes along. I think, yeah, we have a question from Alicia.
Hi, thanks, Alicia Vinoy from Ohm Connect. I was just concerned on this bullet point that DR should bid the full duration. I think Josh was getting at this a little bit a couple minutes ago, but it seems like Ohm Connect dispatches a lot, and I just can't imagine us bidding a full 4 hours into the market multiple times a week. I think our users would not like us very much. Could someone speak to that a little bit more? It just seems like it would discourage frequent smaller dispatches, I guess.
Yeah, and to be clear, I don't think DR should be trying to dispatch its full resource for its full duration on a regular basis necessarily. Just offering into the market, right? So if you're doing that, let's say at this new price cap that we're proposing, $600, it's very infrequently you're actually going to be dispatched, right? That's still just a few times a year. So again, always offering, right? And that's kind of the paradigm of the availability assessment hours. You have to bid that kind of every day and in those hours every day, but that doesn't mean you're being dispatched every day. Does that make sense?
And if I can add to that, Eric, I think BAM and my proposal I put together, like, look, you would only count hours where you exceed 80% of the historical net load, right? So it really counts those really upper tier hours into the bid alignment metric, not the majority of hours that are happening on a regular basis. There might be some way to adapt that and kind of modify that if needed. So I think like the distinction, right, because Ohm Connect, like, you guys are dispatching all the time, as you noted. But really, if there's like a really high temperature, event or extreme event, then probably there's need for the capacity and for the full duration.
Okay,
But
so
probably only under the circumstances.
This requirement is only on days of 80% or greater net load. Is that what you said?
Yeah, that's the way I proposed it. I think Eric's trying to shift that over to be if the day-ahead market's above 600, right, in terms of the price. So you can pick a threshold, but there needs to be some type of threshold that says this is really when you need capacity, because ultimately this metric right here, this is a qualifying capacity component, and it basically boils down to do you have the resources available, right, and can you deliver those resources for capacity needs. And as we know pretty well, the bulk of a huge amount of capacity is driven by the top 1% of hours.
Great, thank you.
And just to clarify, I think we are looking at this kind of like price-based mechanism in our construct and the normalized load impacts and all, not necessarily implying that we should use that for Josh's proposal. If you want to just look at top 100 net load hours or whatever it is, that's yeah, we're open to that. See a hand from New York.
Hey, this is Noah from Olivine. Josh, does your proposal, are you saying there shouldn't be any assessment on hours that aren't in the top 80%? Which would mean
you probably should still bid, right? But the actual bid alignment metric is focused on those more critical hours, because it's really asking the question is, are you making yourself available when resources are needed? As I kind of said multiple times, right? Like DR in general is not producing energy, it's reducing or shifting energy.
Yeah.
Right. So it's really a capacity product, but people are bidding into the energy market in order to make sure they're visible to CAISO and can be put in the dispatch stack.
Yeah, and I guess the bidding requirements would depend on the CAISO relaxing the RAIM too, but you technically wouldn't have to bid those other hours, or there wouldn't be any penalty if you don't bid or you keep it at really low capacity.
Yeah, there could still be a requirement that you must bid. It's just you don't necessarily have to bid the full duration, perhaps. you can outside of those hours. But I think like Kaiser should chime in if they want to on that perspective, right? Because again, this is a capacity, qualifying capacity, and part of what we're seeing is the capacity needs to show up in the energy market when resources are needed or are likely to be needed.
So this is Amy from SE. Sorry, my internet went out, and I apologize if you guys may have addressed this while I lost connectivity. So kind of, I think a couple of different questions I have is, so for RDRRs, there are other requirements. So it's not just it meets the price and it gets dispatched, right? So currently, as long as the CAISO issues an EEA watch or higher notice, then those resources become available. So what if prices are high, but the ISO doesn't issue an EEA watch 1, 2, or 3? Then, like, what happens with those resources is one of my questions. I don't know if anybody has any comments on that one.
Yeah, I think that's going to take a little bit of defining, but I think for both kind of proposals on the table, it's doable. I think it would, maybe the bid alignment metric just becomes not relevant to RDRR. Maybe it's just sort of the assumption is that, its bids, are either when CAISO, the equivalent of its availability assessment hours are either when, CAISO releases its bids into the market or is, exceptionally dispatched, in which case it's the full capacity that's being bid. So, maybe RDRR, pretty much just always ends up with a BAM of 1. In which case, then it would just kind of come down to the performance alignment metric.
I think that's an interesting idea. I think, Amy, I think your point is that there needs to be a different set of rules for reliability RDRR resources because they are available to CAISO, right, under basically conditions, a specific set of conditions, but they're not required to necessarily be bidding into the market all the time. So you can get called, for example, for you can get called even if the market didn't meet the day-ahead market didn't meet the price that you bid it at overall. So it's kind of has a different kick to it. I think most RDR resources are effectively semi-ancillary services, pretty short, fast response resources that can be called on pretty quickly.
Well, not BIP, but yes, the direct load control programs, I would say probably fit in that, right? So SDP and API.
Yeah.
But for BIP, it still requires customers to do something.
Yeah, but they're still responding within 15 minutes or 30 minutes, if I remember correctly, plus some allowance for the communication. Yeah.
Right. And then in addition to that, not all of our RDR resources are bid into the day-ahead market. So some of them are only available in the real-time market, and as long as the ISO EEA X notice is issued. So I mean, I'm not saying we have to have different rules for RDRRs, but it's just I think it does make it more challenging for this working group to create one set of rules that applies to all instances and all types of resources, I guess is what I really trying to say. And I just want to make sure that as we develop these parameters that we're just, that we make sure that we're being all inclusive or figure out how to make this fair for the various resources.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, I definitely agree. You know, and I think a longstanding goal has been sort of parity across the different DR resources. Even so, I'll admit there's still like a part of my mind that wonders if RDRR is just like a different animal and can, you know, play in its own sandbox. So I'd be curious to hear what folks think of that, because it, you know, my impression at least is that, you know, BIP and the other RDR resources are kind of the types of resources that the load impact protocols and this, you know, original QC methodology actually work pretty darn well for. So, you know, it could be that there isn't, you know, a big need to update that. You know, so we could also separate it out by, you know, this new stuff we're doing is just PDR, or we could do a little bit more work to sort of more specifically define how RDRR fits in the new framework. So open to thoughts on that.
This is Sam Harper for Klika. I apologize. I had to step away for a few minutes, so I didn't hear all of the first part of this RDRR portion of the conversation. But I do think it's there's a lot to be said for just removing RDRR because it is a different animal. There's probably a way to fit it in, but I think it would require quite a lot of work. So there's a couple paths, but it is quite a different thing. And I agree with the comment before that the LIPS process was designed originally for something like RDRR, and it works pretty well for it.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Yeah, I think something we'll want to hear from stakeholders on this one is, you know, are there any equity concerns? Are folks feeling like leaving RDRR sort of under the status quo, is that going to, you know, does that create an equity concern between, you know, third-party DR, PDR, or whatever else that we should be aware of? So just throw that question out to the group. But we don't have to cover that right now.
So Eric, if I were to summarize what you said, and I want to make sure you get this straight, there's two thoughts that you had, right? One of them is include RDRR under something like the BAM and PAM metric, but for RDRR, all you focus on is the performance, not really the bids, because the bids don't really apply overall. And the other thought there is just to simply say, look, RDR should just have a different process. You know, what's in place works, leave it as is.
I think that's a fair characterization of the two ideas rambling around my head. Thanks.
But if, you know, obviously if there's like some third way or whatever, you know,
right,
you know, we would welcome hearing it as well.
Yeah. And do you have any thoughts as to how you would incorporate RDR into the BNLI calculation, the other alternative? Because I can see it with the PAM and BAM, you know, just focus on the performance, forget the bid alignment for RDR, but I'm struggling to see how that would fit with the BNLI metric.
Yeah, and I think it would actually be quite similar, where, you know, you're not looking at, you know, bids in each of these 5 hours, right? Availability assessment hours, or, you know, whatever the hours that the resource has committed to under slice of day. But instead, you'd sort of be looking at, you know, whenever it is sort of either inserted into the market or, you know, called by exceptional dispatch by CAISO. So again, it's similar to, you know, under the context of PAM and BAM, it's like the PAM is not that relevant. I think under the bid normalized impact paradigm, the adjustments that we make relative to bids is kind of not relevant, right? Every time they're dispatched, you would just look at the performance, right? And then it becomes, you know, a model of performance on whether, if it's say an AC program, if it's not weather sensitive, maybe there's some other things they want to account for in the model. Otherwise, it's pretty much just an average of performance. And, you know, like the current paradigm, if there's an absence of a dispatch, it's just, you know, test performance. So I think it would be fairly straightforward to accommodate either way. But, you know, as Sam pointed out, perhaps more straightforward just to leave it alone. But
Eric, this is Luke from the council. I hear, you know, what my colleagues at, you know, Klika and Edison are saying. And they're not necessarily wrong, but at the same time, I feel like if we walk out of this process with two different processes set up, you know, for different types of programs, for lack of a better term, then we would be going in the wrong direction. You know, again, I understand and not holding this against them, but, you know, Klika doesn't pay for the LIPs, and utilities, you know, it's ratepayer money. And so, whereas DR providers, this comes directly out of their pockets. And so I urge you to consider, you know, I just suggest that we all consider that as a key kind of need on the part of the demand response community.
yeah, I think that's fair. And those are exactly the concerns we, well, suspected were out there. So we appreciate you voicing those.
Well, maybe this is a point to take. We had sort of allotted a 5-minute break before we go into the next section. If we want to continue talking about this,
Yeah.
Yeah, feel free.
Yeah, Eric, go ahead. Oh,
Sorry, David. Yeah, that was me. That was just me. If you want to say anything, go for it. But I was just going to say we could maybe pause now. Take that break.
I was just going to respond to a question that was asked earlier, just like a second response. I think in talking about, you know, what the intermediary options are between, you know, things that are 5-minute dispatchable or day ahead, just wanted to note, you know, that the real-time market encompasses several different look-aheads and accounts for, you know, longer startup times and minimum run times. So I think as long as a resource was able to, you know, start up and have a minimum running time that total was less than, you know, around 4.5 hours, then it could participate in the real-time market. Thanks.
thanks, Eric. Okay. You know what? Let's take that 5-minute break, and then let's move into the CSP, and then we'll have time at the end if we need to come back to some other issues. I mean, I think CSP, as Daniel mentioned, is a little more straightforward. And so let's come back at 10:18, and we'll continue from there. Okay.
We get started?
Yeah, let's get started here, guys. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Great.
So next slide up.
Yeah, you can steer us here. So, I want to shift gears a little bit and start talking and introducing the capacity shortfall problem space. I know that I guess the intention, I want to call it again, was to have some of the performance metrics defined before we introduce this topic. Realistically, I think it won't matter that much beyond knowing that the inputs to this formula are either the BNLI or the PAM BAM product. And so just keeping that in mind, how these things fit together. I think it's fair right now that we can start talking about what that actual penalty formula looks like. I wanted to start just by setting the landscape for what kind of things we've been considering, and then invite working group participants to contribute comments on the different sort of options that have been on the table or propose new formulas that we have yet to consider. So with that, maybe we can go to the next slide and just remind everybody what was in the original CEC proposal and sort of what the different aspects of this are and how this would work coming from the performance metric. The idea here is that there's an adjusted under deliver up to, I think the point right here is 94.5%. So there's a threshold at which then the amount that is delivered or assessed to be delivered from the performance metric, there's a penalty that scales with the sort of percentage or the ratio of what was demonstrated and what was I guess what gets to be the effective revenue out of that. This was considered as a fairly strict penalty because of sort of the right side of this plot. We are suggesting that if you underdeliver beyond about 48%, that there would be an out-of-pocket penalty for a demand response provider. The suggestion that DSA made was a slight adjustment to that, and to just remove that out-of-pocket penalty. But the formula here is that this scales with the sort of not straight to the adjusted or sorry, unadjusted capacity that was demonstrated. The alternative to that, I don't know if there's more details we want to talk about on this. Feel free to reference the CEC report that outlines this in more detail. Was proposed by SEDMEC. Maybe we can switch that. This is a potentially less stringent enforcement or penalty. There's still this out-of-pocket sort of losing 100% of what was bid in. But it only comes into effect at this 50% threshold. We had received comments on this as well from the last working group cycle, which is all in the CEC docket. But wanted to sort of remind everybody that this was also proposed as a formula for how to assess a penalty. And I guess, yeah, we can just continue on into the next. This was the most recent proposal as an adjustment to the original CEC formula. The suggestion here is that we don't want to be deterring demand response participation with penalties. I guess the question to the working group is what feels the most appropriate, and sort of what can we base that off of. in terms of this balance between something that is stringent and like encouraging people to play the game accurately, but not so stringent as to discourage participation. So, as promised, this was a more straightforward section in terms of laying out what kind of formulas we've been considering and have been proposed. From there, we can go straight into the next steps. Does committed mean awarded bid?
I think Eric has a comment.
Yeah.
Sure, and I can take, was that Gil's question first? We've typically understood committed capacity to mean shown RA capacity. That might be a little different if there's a world in which we're still crediting RA, but either way, it's either what's shown or credited. Ideally, everything is kind of shown under this world, though. And so that would be in month ahead showings. Yeah, I think that's probably the level of detail needed. Let me know if that answers your question, Gil. I just wanted to mention, oh, was there another?
Yeah, this is Gil. So
There you go.
the answer is we are comparing the performance to the hourly value, not what is picked up by the market.
Yes. So I think, for example, basically under either the DSA or CEC approaches, we both get sort of a measure of ex post capacity, and so we'd be comparing that measure on a monthly basis to what was shown on the RA plan. So for example, to Natalie's question, does the awarded bid reflect the performance in the real-time market? Those questions would all sort of be handled in the calculation of ex post capacity, right? For example, are we requiring participation in the real-time market? Or is it okay if we're just looking at day ahead bids for those long start resources like we talked about? And in the bid normalized impacts, the sort of different components of amount bid and dispatched and delivered would all be sort of rolled up into that one bid normalized impact metric, which is then used to kind of develop that regression, and again come up with a single capacity number for the month to sort of compare against the shown RA value. Is that answering the question?
Can you remind me where the weather normalization of delivered capacity done in the process?
Yeah, so in the CEC proposal, that's done through the regression, right? So you take your bid normalized load impact points, you run a regression of some kind, and I think we can add more flexibility maybe than I added in the original proposal about all the things that can go into that. But effectively, you run a regression, you measure it at that sort of hot temperature, the planning temperature that corresponds with worst day. Let's see. Oh yeah, so that's how the weather normalization is taking place in the CEC proposal, right? That we're not really counting what it's doing at those low temperatures. We're looking at what it's doing in those really high temperatures. Under the DSA proposal, that's sort of happening sort of macro level by looking at how the resource is bidding relative to what it said it would across all those different temperatures. And then again, sort of how is it performing, at all those different temperatures.
If I can chime in on the DSA one, Gil basically will come out with it'll be basically BAM times PAM, right? But all those are based on comparisons of actual conditions to the capability profile. And the capability profile is directly linked to the slice a day, component. So really at the end of the day, you may end up with, say, here's a performance factor called that BAM times FAM is equal to 94%. Then you apply that 94% to the full, slice a day showing that you had. Because you're kind of sitting there saying, like, look, you told me you could deliver before the year, right, this amount of megawatts. In practice, when we factor in like your bit alignment and your performance alignment, you're giving me 94%. And you would apply it to every single hour, every single month equally. So the weather normalization is actually happening in the time temperature matrix, if you want to put it that way, because we're basically saying you can actually compare actuals to what the capability profile looks like for the same set of weather conditions and dispatch conditions.
Thank you. That's helpful.
One additional comment, Luke, I know you have your hand up, but I wanted to point out, I don't know if you guys are covering the phase-in of this, because I think part of the proposal I put together was to include a phase-in of this that included one additional year. You had like the penalty-free year, then one where the GAM, I think that's what the metric you guys use, but the multiplier would be shift over to 0.25, actually 0.5, and then one that would shift to 1. So basically kind of phase it in, so you kind of have like a year where there's no penalty, a year where there's partial penalties, or half the thing is implemented, in the final year where the full thing is fully implemented.
Yeah, thanks. That's a good point, Josh. Yeah, so I just want to say I sort of redid the original analysis I did to come up with the lambda value that sets how stringent this value is, and so I redid it with Josh's methodology. I found that it really doesn't change much, but I think reduces risk to DRPs by quite a bit. So I'm just saying I'm really happy to support this formulation of the proposal. And I think the phase-in approach, I don't feel strongly one way or the other, but I think that's ultimately going to be a PUC decision.
Yeah, so. I was just going to point out that ultimately the decision will be in the RA proceeding, the new RA proceeding, which is not yet out, I don't believe, not yet started. So, if and when any kind of new metric and evaluation is accepted, at that point, they may decide on a phase-in or some other time frame for it. And we certainly can think about that in terms of when we do submit a kind of final report, if we or whatever, however we submit this to the proceeding. But there will also be opportunities, obviously, for comment by parties at that point too, in that proceeding, to whatever extent that this is discussed or involved in that. So we will not be deciding on any kind of implementation necessarily for this. We will be providing that to the CPUC RA proceeding, just a report, and then it will get handled in the record in there. So. Oh, Luke, you had a comment?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, obviously, Josh's approach, I think, makes more sense from the DR provider standpoint for obvious reasons, but also from a implementation standpoint, I'm guessing that would be a whole lot easier than what was, even what the council had proposed earlier on. And so just want to get that out there. Also, with regard to, Gil's question, I'm glad that you asked that, because, it's precipitated me to kind of repeat my earlier suggestion that it'd be helpful if we can kind of, maybe at the end of this process, maybe that's the time to do that, to basically kind of firm up a little bit, how this is all going to play out. I realize, the mandate, for this working group is to focus on 3 outstanding elements of the incentive-based methodology, but at the same time, it's important that we all have a pretty clear understanding as to how it's going to work together. And of course, we would, the council would love to see that, you know, looking at this, the chart that's up right now, the dotted line diverge from the solid line as late as possible, or as far down as possible. But at the same time, we do recognize that if we're looking at the capability profiles, you know, of the DR resources rather than you know, what the way the council had envisioned it early, you know, during the phase 2 of the CEC's working group, then, you know, it's a little bit, you know, it's easier to stomach, you know, having that dotted line diverge earlier, you know, from the straight line. Excuse me, not from the straight line, but from the solid line. So we can talk some more about that, you know, we will in our comments, you know, in terms of where that should, you know, divergence should occur and what the shape should be and all that. But I want to provide that initial thought. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to just chime in on that. I think on this plot, it was meant to be identical to the original CEC plot as well, and having a 94.5% threshold, and it doesn't look like that's happening in here. So apologies for that mistake. That threshold, I believe, is coming from consistency with RAIM. Eric maybe can correct me on that, but I think that is up for consideration as well.
Yeah, so, you know, just from what our sort of policy consideration is, you know, Luke, I understand the reason for wanting that divergence to be further kind of down the line. What we found from our analysis is the further down the line you go, the more kind of distortive of an effect it is, because there's sort of less immediate downside for underperformance. So if there's a chance you'll overperform, it sort of encourages DR providers to be a little bit more optimistic than they might actually expect to, than they should actually expect to be. So you know, I think there's a little bit of wiggle room there. Daniel's right that the 94.5 was determined for consistency with RAIM. I think ultimately the ideal is to not have any sort of is just to have it diverge right away from a theoretical standpoint. But you know.
Yeah, but there is a case to be made to have a bit of a buffer, call it like the line divergence to 90% or something like that. Primarily because like DR doesn't have direct measurement, right? So you're going to always have a little bit of noise in the measurement that's going to happen from year to year. You know, so there might be a little bit of wiggle room to kind of put that in there. Ultimately, I think like this is something we kind of need to make sure that you know, CPUC has a chance to chime in on. You know, and my philosophy in putting together this proposal was, I saw what you know, Segment had put together, and I saw the proposal from you know, that came from in the CC report, and I looked at it and said, look, you know, there's an in-between position in here that we can take, and that's really what I aim for, just modifying the CC proposal to kind of make it seem more reasonable, trying to address some of those concerns. You know, but there might be a way to wiggle it and say, look, you know, we include a buffer, because we do know that measurement of the R is not perfectly precise. You know, and there might need to be a little bit of wiggle room for that to account for the volatility.
Yeah, also to the comment in the chat, I think that is also meant to replicate, like it should continue on. So I can correct this slide as well, but it was supposed to go on as the CEC plot did.
So it would. This is Hallie who asked the question. Yeah. It would go up at the
100%
steeper slope, and then the slope would go back down.
It would go. It would it would match this no penalty, sort of the unadjusted slope.
So basically, if you deliver 105%, you get 105%.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. If you delivered 95%, you get like a 90% payment or something like that. I think the math kind of that's the way it works out.
Right. Except in that case, you would be above that 94.5% threshold, so you would actually get 90. But yeah, exactly. That's the idea.
Yeah, I will say, I think, you know, in one of the original formulations, you know, it's I think it's fine for DR providers to make those sort of those terms in their contracts with LSEs, right? If they can be paid for over performance. I don't necessarily know that we can sort of mandate that in our context. Because effectively we'd be saying like, you know, you contract for 100 megawatts. If there's over performance, you know, whatever LSE contracted for that has to then pay. So I'm like a little cautious around that. But that doesn't mean, again, that they couldn't include those terms in contracts, right? To pay for over performance. But the LSE can't get credit for that over performance ahead of time, right? They can only get credit in the RA space for what is shown. So I just a word of caution there. I see Luke's hand up. Did you have a new question or was it just up from earlier?
Sorry about that.
Up from earlier.
So why don't we move on to next steps?
Yeah. I want to briefly just sort of also respond to, I think, the point that Luke is raising in terms of having some clarity around how all these pieces fit together. I think we're intending to put together documentation on sort of what ultimately the full testing methodology will be. And hopefully that will clarify how sort of one of these elements is an input to the next and the exact process. I think in terms of the comments that we're soliciting, or comments and proposals that we're soliciting now, we'd like to stay focused on the capacity shortfall penalty, sort of similar to the last round. I think are open to having some discussion on topics that are sort of related but not directly I guess concerning the formula, the specific formula for this penalty mechanism. But anyway, we are asking for those to be submitted by a week from today. So next Friday. Again, the focus should be on what the preference is in terms of strictness of this penalty, how that should manifest, and maybe if there's a formula that we have not considered, sort of an introduction of that as well. I guess moving on to the next slide, just to talk briefly about what the format of the next time we all meet will look like. Again, pretty straightforward. It will be sort of a redux of the BNLI performance metric sort of format. We'll have everybody who submitted proposals. We'll invite the opportunity to speak and share out with the broader working group. We may adjust this format slightly because it is just sort of a different topic, and probably we'll have proposals that are of a slightly different nature. But we'll sort of ask for a similar timeline on getting those from everybody who wants to present to the larger working group, and ask for those to be submitted shortly thereafter, shortly after the initial written proposal and comments are sent out. So I guess want to also flag if there are outstanding comments on the discussion of the performance metric and specifically on the point of how either of those methods for calculating the performance metric feed into this penalty. I think maybe we can sort of have this last chunk of time here before the meeting wraps up to make sure that everybody's on the same page for how the inputs to this formula work and where they're coming from. I think that's pretty much all of the slides that we have today. We can also have some time to talk about these logistics, but hopefully they're not coming out of left field. I just want to be sure that everybody understands, like, sort of the point that was raised earlier of what we're talking about in demonstrated capacity, where the weather sensitivity is coming into play, sort of those sorts of points.
And just to confirm, make sure people understand, send the comments to myself, Daniel, and Eric.
Right. Yes.
You don't need to officially serve any service list or any of this working group even. Of course, you're free to send the comments to whoever you like, but make sure we get them. And otherwise, there's no official service required. Did anybody else want to provide comments to Daniel's consideration of maybe how the performance metric feeds into the CSP, or anything else that maybe they wanted to get last words in on the previous discussion? We do have 13 more minutes on our clock.
So I see a comment on whether, I assume this for the CEC proposal, in terms of assessing a penalty, I think there would be a penalty, there would be a take back penalty when that assessed effective revenue is negative. Otherwise, it would be a reduced revenue. So in sort of the final proposal that we put on screen from DSA, I believe we're suggesting in that case reduced revenue instead of out-of-pocket penalty. But again, I think that's a point that is up for discussion.
Yeah, and just to clarify, even though it never, the sort of revenue, the capacity revenue never goes negative specifically, I still see, for example, the demand side analytics proposal as a penalty, right? If we were doing sort of a strictly pay for performance approach, where you commit 100 megawatts, you only deliver 50, then we'll pay you for 50, right? Because that's what you delivered. That's what I would sort of consider sort of just reduced revenue. But that the penalty comes from, you're losing additional revenue from having a shortfall between what you committed to and what you delivered. So yes, revenue technically doesn't go below zero, but I would still consider that a penalty.
Natalie, is your question somewhat related to the enforcement mechanism as to? Yeah, and so that's, basically how the money will flow, so to speak, who will be enforcing this and such. That is a later discussion, but we know they're very much related. So certainly, as we mentioned in one of the slides, we're welcome to like initial discussions of that. Obviously a lot of the financial activity happens at the Cal ISO level, but CPUC certainly has certain enforcement capabilities as well. So this is something to be considered, either in the not the CSA section, although we are accepting preliminary comments on that as well, so we can start thinking about it. But in the next section, it's the primary aspect that we will be discussing.
Okay, thanks, Stephen.
We have Stephen.
Yes. Hi, this is Stephen Costello from the Public Advocate's Office. I just wanted to comment and say that I don't like reduced revenues are not penalties, in my opinion. And I think it's concerning here, especially if we're discussing DR providers being able to basically determine their own QC beforehand. There need to be stricter penalties on the back end, and that actually needs to they need to be significant enough to actually incentivize behavior, like as in performance. And you know, just not getting paid is not a penalty. So,
Luke?
In response to that, I would suggest that if DR providers or utilities, you know, I know we'll have to, you know, in the next phase, we'll have to talk about how this would apply to utilities. But if their reduction in revenues is, you know, becomes, the revenue loss becomes, you know, more proportionally greater than the amount of capacity that they actually deliver, then that is a penalty. In other words, they're delivering something that they're not getting paid for. And so I would absolutely classify that as a penalty.
Thanks, Luke. Yeah, I think that's a good way of describing it. I agree with that characterization.
I would say, like, if I pay someone to paint my house and they only paint like half of my house and we don't pay them, you know, I wouldn't call that penalizing the contractor.
Well, I think
look at it this way: if they pay your half your house, but you only pay them for painting a quarter of your house, that is a penalty to them because they're only being paid for half the work that they performed.
Yeah, I would say it's.
In what case would that occur in this situation, Luke? I mean, I guess maybe if you can
explain. Half my house?
I'm sorry?
Painting half my house?
No, I guess you know, when you apply to this scenario, maybe I guess I'm not understanding the illustration better.
Well, yeah, I mean, my understanding is for how this whole thing works is that you get your, let's just look at it on an hourly basis. You get your QC value, right? That's based on your, you know, capability profile for that given hour. And, you know, after doing your, you know, and you're going through the BNLI or whatever kind of process we end up using, you know, a performance metric process. And it turns out that the value of your, or the quantity of capacity you've delivered is less than what your capability profile indicates that it is. If it falls, you know, far enough down that, you know, penalty curve, then you'll get paid accordingly, you know, to whatever the penalty curve looks like, right? And if you deliver above that point where the dotted line diverges from the solid line, then you don't lose revenue, or you don't lose revenue beyond what sorry, I want to think of the right words here. You don't lose revenue for something that you've not delivered, that you've delivered. So in other words, if you get 96%, then yeah, you know, maybe you get paid, you know, for 96%, but you don't get paid for 90%.
So to be more explicit here, and I'm not going to engage in the whole debate as to what's a penalty or not, because I think I just want to make sure it's clear. If you, under the proposal put together, if you deliver 75% of what you said you would only get paid 50%. Bluntly, right? So it's effectively saying, look, I'm going to deliver to you, to use a different analogy, 1,000 computers under this contract, and I only deliver 750. You know, then basically I'm not going to get payment for the 750. I'll get payment for 500.
Okay.
Right. So it's a question as to how you want to view that, right? Because this particular resource is not an all or nothing thing. It's you can deliver part of it, you know, but you're not getting full payment if you only do partial delivery.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Are there any other questions or comments? We have about 5 minutes left. I'm happy to return in the 5 minutes if there's no more to be discussed. And just, you know, I'm available through email for if you have general questions and procedural questions and such, and anything else. We're open for discussion, the three of us. So happy to be available.
With a notable exception that I will be out for most of the rest of the month. So I will not be at our next working group meeting, which is why I just wanted to sort of share where my support lies with the updated DSA proposal. But you know, have a good have a good working group without me. Look forward to seeing you when I return.
Thank you. So yeah, so Eric will not be available for the next one, but yeah. So thank you everybody for participating, and we look forward to your comments. And again, we will probably send out an updated slide deck. I think we might include, because Eric, I know, showed a few slides today that we may want to include in the as an appendix as well. And I think there was a correction that Josh wanted us to make on the table there. So we will send out a corrected one. The most recent version will be available hopefully soon on the DR Workshops website. All right. Okay, everybody, thank you. Enjoy the rest of the day, and have a nice weekend as well. Okay, bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoy your time off, Eric.
Thank you. Bye.